Gerald came to me in the fall of 2013, and he did not come to talk about anything dramatic. He did not come for spiritual direction. He was not in crisis. He was not asking about moral theology or anything that had the shape of a theological question. He came because something felt wrong, and he did not have language for it, and he thought, because I had spent 35 years as a religion teacher at a Catholic school, that I might be able to help him name it. Gerald was an usher at the 10:30 Sunday Mass at our parish, had been for 11 years. He helped with the food drive every Advent. He was the kind of man who quietly made things work, who was there when you needed something done and did not require recognition for it. A genuinely good man. He sat down across from my desk and said, "Raymond, I feel spiritually dead. I go to Mass every week, I receive communion, I do everything I'm supposed to do. And I feel nothing. I pray, and it feels like I am talking to a ceiling. Something is missing, and I cannot figure out what it is." I asked him some careful questions and listened. After about 20 minutes, something came out that he had not led with. He mentioned that he had been married before, that his first marriage had ended in civil divorce in the late 1990s, and that he had married again shortly after. He had done this without seeking an annulment. He had understood there was some canonical complexity. He had not, in the years that followed, gone to confession. He had continued attending Mass. He had continued receiving communion. Every week for 14 years, he had walked up to the altar at the 10:30 Sunday Mass and received the body of Christ. He did not think of himself as doing anything wrong. He was not being defiant. He genuinely believed, sincerely, without guile, that because he attended Mass every week, he was in good standing, that the fidelity of his attendance covered what had not been formally addressed. I sat with what he told me for a moment. Then I said, "Gerald, I think I know what the ceiling is. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in Covington, Kentucky. I studied at the Athenaeum of Ohio Seminary. I have read Padre Pio's actual letters, not the devotional selections, the complete epistolario in 4 volumes, and I have spent years with Father Chad Ripperger's systematic work on the psychology of the spiritual life. What I want to tell you tonight is not primarily about condemnation. It is about mechanics. If you have been attending Mass every Sunday and feeling for months or years that prayer is not going anywhere, that God feels strangely distant despite your faithfulness, the mechanics may be exactly what you need. Stay with me, because this is where it matters. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 27 through 29. I want you to hear these words as Paul wrote them, without softening them. He wrote to the church at Corinth in approximately 57. He wrote about a community where the Eucharist was being received carelessly, and he was not pastoral about it. He wrote, "Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. A man ought to examine himself before he eats of the bread and drinks of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on himself." 3 words in that passage I want you to hold. Guilty, judgment, himself. Paul does not say the person who receives unworthily receives less grace. He does not say the reception is spiritually less effective. He says the person is guilty, the same Greek word used for criminal liability, and that they eat and drink judgment on themselves. This is not a metaphor in Catholic theology. This is not rhetorical exaggeration from a first-century writer who lacked nuance. This is the Apostle Paul, writing under inspiration, describing what happens when a baptized Christian approaches the altar of God in a condition of unrepentant grave sin. They receive judgment, not neutral absence of grace, not a wasted reception. Judgment. The Church has a canon law that addresses this exactly. Canon 9:16. A person who is conscious of grave sin is not to receive the body of the Lord without previous sacramental confession, unless there is a grave reason and there is no opportunity to confess. Most weekly Mass attendees have never read that sentence. I taught Catholic high school for 35 years, and I am not certain I ever taught it with the weight it deserves, because the implication of that sentence, placed alongside Paul's description in 1 Corinthians, is not gentle. It names a condition. It identifies who is in it. and it tells them plainly what they must not do until the condition is addressed. Now, I want to tell you about Padre Pio and his Mass. We know from documented witness testimony, preserved by Bernard Ruffin in Padre Pio, the true story published by our Sunday Visitor, that Padre Pio's Masses regularly lasted between 2 and 3 hours. Not because of an unusually elaborate ritual, because he was experiencing something. Witnesses describe him during the consecration as visibly distressed, not distressed in the way of a man performing deep meditation, distressed in the way of a man in genuine agony. Some witnesses reported that he appeared to be weeping. Some reported that he seemed barely able to finish the words of consecration. This was not mystical theater. It was, in the framework Padre Pio himself described in his letters, the actual experience of the Passion, in which he participated not as observer, but as participant, bearing the weight of what was being offered on the altar. But here is the part that stopped me when I first read the testimony carefully. The witnesses did not only report that Padre Pio experienced the Passion during the consecration, they reported that he appeared affected by the state of the congregation, that he could see, and the word see is the right word, not a metaphor, the interior condition of the people present. That when people carrying unconfessed mortal sin were approaching the altar to receive, he bore a weight that had its own specific character. He wept not only for what was being offered on the altar, he wept because of what he could see in the souls who were approaching it. Now I need to tell you what Padre Pio did in the confessional regarding unworthy reception, because this is documented in multiple sources, and it is not vague. Padre Pio turned people away from the confessional. This is well known. What is less discussed is the specific category for which he most often refused absolution, habitual sacrilege. The pattern in which a Catholic attends Mass regularly, receives communion regularly, and does so while carrying unconfessed grave sin, not once, not in an emergency, but as a sustained practice. He treated this as among the most serious matters he encountered. Ruffin documents that he said to those approaching communion in conditions he could perceive were spiritually unfit, "God is not mocked." And Padre Pio wrote in a letter preserved in the Epistolario, "Confession without repentance is a deception of conscience, in essence a sacrilege." Read that again. A deception of conscience, in essence a sacrilege, not a weaker form of the sacrament, not a less effective reception, a sacrilege. And he understood, and this is the part that has stayed with me, that the principle of that sentence extends beyond the confessional. The Catholic who attends Sunday Mass in a state of unconfessed mortal sin without genuine contrition, who approaches the altar as part of the weekly routine, the way a person keeps an appointment, is not committing a neutral act. They are at Calvary with a heart that has refused to be moved by it. Padre Pio could see this. He bore it. That is why his Masses lasted 3 hours. Now I need to bring in Father Chad Ripperger, because Padre Pio identified this in individual souls across 4 decades in a confessional, and Ripperger has articulated the mechanism with a precision I have found invaluable. Ripperger, drawing from his conference work and from Deliverance Prayers for the Laity, published in 2018, teaches that the efficacy of the Mass for a specific soul depends on the disposition of that soul. The Mass is objectively powerful. What happens on the altar is not conditioned by the congregation's spiritual state. The sacrifice is offered, the body and blood are present. That is not in question. What is in question is the capacity of the soul to receive what is being offered. Ripperger uses the image of a vessel. A soul in an open, repentant disposition is an open vessel. What the Mass offers can enter it. A soul in unrepentant mortal sin is not a neutral vessel. It is a closed vessel, sealed against the grace being offered, not merely failing to receive it, but actively in a condition of closure. And he goes further. The soul which receives communion week after week in a state of unrepentant grave sin is not receiving nothing. It is receiving what Paul says it is receiving: judgment. And that judgment, received repeatedly, produces a specific pattern in the interior life. Ripperger identifies it with a diagnostic precision I found when I first read it, immediately recognizable from cases I had seen across 35 years. prayer that feels like talking to a wall, a persistent sense that God is at a distance, a spiritual numbness the person cannot account for, typically attributed to tiredness or the ordinary wear of adult life, a creeping interior desolation with no obvious external cause. This is not God's absence, it is the symptom of a sealed vessel. The grace is present at the altar, it is being offered. The soul that approaches week after week without the interior condition Paul names is not drawing from the well. It is approaching the well, going through the motions of drawing water and returning with empty hands. And doing this year after year while wondering why the living water the church promises does not seem to be arriving. The sealed vessel does not simply remain sealed. Each unworthy reception compounds the condition that makes the next reception unworthy. Habitual sacrilege is not static. It accumulates. And the person who has been doing this for 14 years, sincere, faithful in attendance, genuinely present in the pew, simply unaware that there was a condition requiring attention before approaching the altar, is carrying 14 years of accumulated weight. And they feel it as a ceiling. They feel it as prayer that goes nowhere. They feel it as God behind glass. Now let me give you the statistic that I think captures the scale of what I am describing. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, affiliated with Georgetown University, reported that less than 20% of American Catholics who attend Mass weekly go to confession even once a year. Less than 20%. Once a year. The mathematical implication is unavoidable. If less than 20% of weekly Mass attendees go to confession even once in 12 months, the majority of people receiving communion at Sunday Mass in American Catholic parishes have not met the condition Paul describes, the examination, the recognition of the body, in over a year, many for considerably longer, the majority. This is not a fringe phenomenon. It is the statistical reality of Sunday Mass attendance in America in 2026. It is the people in the pews around you. It is, and I say this without drama and without accusation, quite possibly you. Padre Pio wept at his altar because he could see the congregation. He bore the weight of that in his body, which is why his masses lasted 3 hours. He was not in ecstasy about what he saw. He was, in significant part, in agony about it. And what he saw was not a congregation of malicious Catholics who had chosen sacrilege with open eyes. It was a congregation of sincere people who had, through genuine devotion, combined with genuine ignorance of the mechanism Paul identifies, arrived at the altar in a condition that prevented them from receiving what they had come to receive. He wept for them because he loved them, not because he condemned them. Now let me be precise about what I am not saying. I am not saying that Catholics who have not confessed in more than a year are bad people. I am not saying they have made a cynical calculation to take grace while avoiding its conditions. What I am saying is that what Gerald was experiencing, the spiritual desolation, the prayer going nowhere, the feeling of a ceiling, is not random. It is not the ordinary difficulty of the spiritual life. It is the precise symptom Ripperger identifies as the diagnostic marker of a sealed vessel. The person who has been going to Mass every Sunday for 14 years without confession is not trying to deceive God. They have been trying to draw water from a well they have, without understanding the mechanism, sealed shut. The mechanics of grace are real. God's mercy is absolute. Nothing I'm saying places limits on God's mercy. What I'm saying is that mercy received requires a vessel capable of receiving it. Gerald was a good man, a sincere man, 11 years of faithful parish service. When I explained the mechanism to him, when I said as plainly as I could, Gerald, what Paul describes as the result of unworthy reception is exactly what you are describing, he wept. Not from guilt, though guilt was present. From relief. He said, "You mean there is a reason it feels like this?" Yes, there is a reason. The reason has a name. It has a scripture passage. It has a canon. It has a sacrament that addresses it. And on the other side of that sacrament is what Gerald discovered when he went to confession that week. He came back to me 2 months later. He said, "Something lifted." I don't know how else to describe it. Something lifted. That is the clearest evidence I have from 35 years of working with students and families that the problem of unworthy reception is not wickedness. It is the absence of the one conversation that explains the mechanics. Now let me give you what I call the pre-Mass examination protocol. 5 steps. You can begin before next Sunday. The first step is the examination before you arrive. On Saturday evenings or Sunday morning before Mass, if Saturday is not possible, take 10 minutes. Not 10 minutes of general piety, 10 minutes of honest examination. Ask yourself 2 questions. First, have I confessed every grave sin since my last sincere confession? Second, am I carrying anything I know at the level of honest self-assessment constitutes grave matter that has not been brought to a confessor? The goal is not guilt production. It is clarity, not the version of the examination that produces a list of small imperfections while leaving the large things unnamed. The honest version, the one that looks at the full year. The second step is the decision made in advance. If the examination reveals that you are carrying unconfessed grave sin, make the decision before Sunday. Not during Mass, not at the altar. Before Sunday. Decide. I will go to confession before I receive again. In the meantime, attend Mass. Attend without receiving. That attendance is an act of humility, not failure. The recognition that what is being offered on the altar is real, that the conditions for receiving it are real, and that you are choosing to honor those conditions. There is more grace in standing at the back of the communion line with honest self-knowledge than in approaching the altar with a sealed interior and a routine that has had nothing behind it for years. The third step is the offertory prayer. At the moment of the offertory, when the priest prepares the gifts, pray silently, Lord, I offer you what I actually am, not what I appear to be. Show me what I carry that I have not yet named. That is not a sacramental act. It is a disposition. It asks God to complete the part of the examination that honest self-reflection cannot reach on its own. The fourth step is the act of contrition before the altar. If you are receiving communion, if your examination has confirmed that you are in a state of genuine grace, make the act of contrition immediately before approaching. Not the formula out of habit, the actual movement of the will. I detest all my sins, not only because I dread the loss of heaven, but most of all because they offend you, my God, who are all good and deserving of all my love. Let those words mean what they say, not as a ritual gate to be passed through, as the genuine interior condition that makes the reception what Paul says it should be, the recognition of the body. The fifth step is 2 minutes of deliberate thanksgiving after Mass. Before you leave the church, as before Sunday takes over, name specifically what you received, in honest language, not theological language. God came to me this morning, in the form of bread, physically, into my body. Name that, and make one concrete resolution for the coming week. 1. Not a list. One specific thing you will do or stop doing in the next 7 days that is a direct response to what was received this morning. This is Padre Pio's confessional practice, condensed into a weekly discipline. He spent 47 years at San Giovanni Rotondo insisting on exactly this, that the sacraments are real, that the conditions for their efficacy are real, and that the soul which approaches them with the interior act Paul describes receives what Paul promises, and the soul that approaches without that interior act receives what Paul says it will receive. Let me close with an image I have returned to many times. Padre Pio at the altar. Not the public Padre Pio of the photographs, the composed figure in the brown habit with the fingerless gloves. The Padre Pio the witnesses describe from inside his masses. The priest who had been standing at that altar for over 40 years, whose masses lasted 3 hours, not because he was performing devotion, but because he was actually there, actually bearing what the sacrifice required him to bear. And in the congregation, people he could see, not see the way you and I see each other, see in the theological sense that his documented charisms describe. Interior condition, state of soul, the opened vessel and the sealed one. The person who had confessed and prepared and arrived with genuine contrition, and the person who had arrived because it was Sunday and the routine had not been examined in years. He wept for both of them. He wept because he loved the people in those pews. He wept because he understood in a way that 47 years in the confessional had given him what was at stake in each individual approach to the altar he was offering. He was not weeping for the dramatic sinners. He was weeping for the sincere ones, the ones who came every week, the ones who genuinely wanted to be faithful, the ones who had, through genuine devotion combined with genuine ignorance of the mechanism Paul describes, arrived at the altar in a condition that meant they were not receiving what they had come to receive. He did not condemn those people. What he offered was precisely what he offered in the confessional: the identification of the condition, the clear statement of what it required, and the path to the grace waiting on the other side. Go to confession first, then come to me at the altar. That is what his practice implied for 47 years. That is the one-sentence distillation of everything he saw from that altar. Gerald sat across from me in the fall of 2013 and said, "I feel spiritually dead." He was not spiritually dead. His soul was alive and paying enough attention to what it was experiencing to bring the question to someone who might have an answer. The ceiling he had been pressing against for 14 years was real, and it was not permanent. He went to confession that week. 2 months later, he said, "Something lifted." I don't know how else to describe it. Something lifted. If you have been attending Mass every Sunday and feeling that prayer goes nowhere, that God is somehow behind glass, that the devotion is genuine but the presence is not, consider the possibility that what you are feeling is not God's absence. Consider the possibility that you are at the well, and the well is full and something on your side of the encounter has been sealed. Consider what Paul said about the examination. Consider what Canon 9:16 says about the condition for reception. Consider what Padre Pio saw from the altar of his 3-hour masses and what he wept about. And consider going to confession before next Sunday, not as punishment. As the mechanics, the water is at the well, it has always been at the well. Be someone he can look at from that altar with peace, not with sorrow. God bless you, and stay vigilant.